The land of Skyrim itself is one of the 9 main provinces within the continent of Tamriel. In addition to Tamriel, there are several other continents we've heard reference to throughout the Elder Scrolls series, such as Akavir, the land of the dragons, for example, or Atmora, the home of the Nords. These continents exist on a planet known as Nirn, which is a part of the mortal plane, known as Mundus. It's here, on the planet of Nirn, within the continent of Tamriel, that the game Skyrim takes place. The history of Tamriel is broken down into 6 eras, starting with the Dawn era and the Merithic era, followed by the First, Second, Third, and Fourth eras. Each game in the Elder Scrolls series is set within a different time period, with Skyrim set in the 2nd century of the 4th era, following previous games such as Oblivion, for example, which takes place in the 3rd era. Through other games in the Elder Scrolls series, we've both visited and heard references to other provinces such as Morrowind, Cyrodiil, and Hammerfell, for example, but for today, we're going to be talking specifically about the province of Skyrim, which is the northernmost province of Tamriel. This is reflected in the cold, harsh environment found in northern parts of Skyrim, such as Winterhold and Dawnstar. A book titled The Annuad Paraphrased sheds light on one of the creation myths of Tamriel, indicating that Nirn was once a single, gigantic piece of land before being split up into several large chunks of land through a great war between 2 groups of Elnofey, who are considered the ancestors of men and elves, commonly referred to in the Elder Scrolls series as Men and Mer. Because of this great war among the Elnofey, the large landmass on Nirn was split into 4 separate areas. In addition to Tamriel, we have Akavir and Atmora referenced before, and Yakuta, the ancestral home of the Redguards. The Elnofey of Tamriel evolved into the elves we've come to know, such as the Dark Elves, Wood Elves, and High Elves, as well as the Dwemer and Chimer, who don't appear as playable races in Skyrim despite references to them found throughout the game. As we see in Skyrim, the Nords are widely considered the original inhabitants of the area. However, that may not actually be the case. In the book Frontier Conquest, we learn that Ysgramor, who many consider to be the first human ruler of Skyrim, was following a long tradition of migration from Atmora like many others before him. As the book explains, quote, "Historians often portray the human settlement of Tamriel as a straightforward process of military expansion by the Nords of Skyrim. In fact, human settlers occupied nearly every corner of Tamriel before Skyrim was even founded. These so-called Nedic peoples include the Proto-Cyrodiilians, the ancestors of the Bretons, the Aboriginals of Hammerfell, and perhaps a now vanished human population of Morrowind. Strictly speaking, the Nords are simply another of these Nedic peoples, the only one that failed to find a method of peaceful accommodation with the elves who already occupied Tamriel. In the early days, Skyrim was ruled by the dragon cult, whose priests we discover masks of throughout Skyrim. Eventually, however, after the Dragon War in the Merithic era, we see references to the 8 divines, who we hear plenty of references to throughout Skyrim. These 8 divines, or 9 if we include Tiber Septim, are considered as the counterparts to the more quote-unquote evil or malevolent Daedra. They are described in the book Varieties of Faith as Akatosh, the dragon god of time; Arche, the god of the cycle of life and death; Dibella, the goddess of beauty; Julianos, the god of wisdom and logic; Kinnereth, the goddess of air; Mara, the goddess of love; Stendar, the god of mercy; Zenithar, the trader god of work and commerce; and of course, Tiber Septim, who, after a life of achievements deemed to be so great that he ascended into godhood, joined the ranks of the divines and became Talos, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. Of course, while the divines are worshipped all throughout Tamriel, as we see, there's also plenty of quiet worship centered around Daedric princes that takes place throughout Skyrim. These Daedric princes are described in the appropriately titled Book of Daedra, with each being associated with a sphere that describes their nature. They are Azura, whose sphere is dusk and dawn; Boethia, whose sphere is deceit and conspiracy; Clavicus Vile, whose sphere is the granting of power through ritual invocations and pacts; Hermaeus Mora, whose sphere is knowledge and memory; Hircine, whose sphere is the hunt; Malakath, whose sphere is the patronage of the spurned and ostracized, and is considered to be the patron of orcs; Mehrunes Dagon, whose sphere is destruction, change, revolution, energy, and ambition; Mephala, whose sphere is obscured to mortals, and whose only consistency seems to be interfering in the affairs of mortals for her amusement; Meridia, whose sphere is also obscured, but is closely associated with light and the energy of living things; Molag Bal, whose sphere is domination and the enslavement of mortals; Namira, who is known as the spirit Daedra and is associated with repulsive creatures; Nocturnal, the night mistress whose sphere is night and darkness; Periite, the taskmaster; Sanguine, whose sphere is revelry and debauchery; Sheogorath, whose sphere is madness; and Vermina, whose sphere is the realm of dreams and nightmares. In Skyrim, we progress through quests associated with these Daedric princes, giving us further insight into their nature and those who follow them. It wasn't until after the Dragon War in the Merethic era, where Alduin was defeated, that we see dragon worship replaced by the worship of the 8 divines. Around this time, we start to see references to the 4 old holds of Skyrim. While the title may make it sound as though these holds are the oldest in all of Skyrim, they're actually named so because of their connection to the old traditions of the Nords. These include the Pale, whose capital is the city of Dawnstar, home to one of the busiest ports in all of Skyrim. Settled in the late Merethic era along with the 3 other old holds, we can find evidence of the dragon cult that once ruled the land in the form of Highgate ruins and Sheerpoint, both of which contain dragon priest masks. We also have Winterhold, home to the appropriately named College of Winterhold. By the time we get to Winterhold, much of the town surrounding the Mages' College has already been destroyed, leaving behind just a few buildings beyond the college and the Jarl's Longhouse. While we don't know what exactly happened here, we hear and see several references to the Great Collapse, in which large portions of the city were lost to the Sea of Ghosts. We also have the Rift. Here, we find the city of Riften, the southeasternmost city in Skyrim. While we know Riften as the home of the Thieves Guild, the city is considered to be one of the main trading hubs in all of Tamriel thanks to Lake Honrish, allowing passage to and from Morrowind. Just because the Rift is one of the 4 old holds of Skyrim doesn't mean it was first settled by Nords. In the Merethic era, before being known as the Rift, this area was previously inhabited by snow elves. After Ysgramor and the Atmorans returned to Skyrim, Captain Gorilda Sharktooth of the Fallowfire then led his men on a journey south, waging war on the snow elves who inhabited the region. Although he perished in battle, the surviving members of his crew went on to claim the land in Ysgramor's name. Last, but certainly not least, we have Eastmarch, the easternmost hold of Skyrim, where Windhelm is found. This hold notably gives way to the only route that extends to and from Morrowind in the area. In addition, it's also considered to be the oldest Nord city in Skyrim still in existence, with Sarthal, which we explore during the College of Winterhold questline, being the oldest. At the center of the city, we find the Palace of Kings, the headquarters of Ysgramor's dynasty and the capital of the First Empire of the Nords in the First Era. This brings us to the other holds of Skyrim, several of which were founded by Ysgramor's companions, as recorded in Songs of the Return. While Ysgramor settled and made a home for himself and his kin in Eastmarch, others went on to settle other holds such as Whiterun. After Ysgramor ventured back to Atmora and returned to Skyrim with a group of 500 companions who subsequently defeated the elves in a series of battles, a group of Ysgramor's companions who traveled on a ship called Jorvaska landed near Whiterun, where they continued to eliminate any and all snow elves they encountered. In doing so, these warriors of the ship Jorvaska came across a landmark Skyrim players are very familiar with, the Skyforge, which actually predates the hold itself. While it isn't known who built the Skyforge, the landmark is the oldest created landmark in all of Skyrim and remains the only known relic from the Dawn era. When Ysgramor's men first discovered the Skyforge, they hoped to gain some insight on its origins from the snow elves they had captured. Specifically, they wanted to know why the elves hadn't settled on the land surrounding the Skyforge, which they thought looked to be perfect for settling. However, instead, the elves, quote, looked with fear at the winged colossus, conveying to the Nords that even the snow elves wanted little to do with the massive statue and its glowing eyes. The book, Songs of the Return, Volume 7 reads, quote, of those who wrought it solid from its mother stone, nothing could be said, but it was known to drive a magic almost as old as Nirn itself, some remnant of the gods' efforts to render a paradise in Mundus before the shattering of Lorcan. While it's unclear who built the Skyforge, it's clear that the landmark predates both the Aldmer and the Snow Elves who occupied Skyrim before the Nords settled on the land. However, the Nords really didn't care who built the Skyforge or why the Snow Elves seemed to fear it, and instead settled on the land, founding the hold of Whiterun during the late Merethic era. We also have the Reach, which was previously inhabited by the Reachmen, who we hear a number of references to throughout Skyrim. Although the Reach was eventually conquered and brought under the Empire's control, it served as a battleground for a number of conflicts over a period of several centuries where the Reachmen sought to maintain control of the region. With the history of the Reach being incredibly multifaceted, we turn to the book, The Improved Emperor's Guide to Tamriel, for more on the history of this hold. Although this passage is a long one, it explains the complex dynamic of various races that inhabited and fought over the region, with the book explaining, quote, the sharp rocks and deep fells of the Reach are indelibly stained with the bloody waxing and waning of empires and attempts to control and subdue these wild mountains. The first invaders were the earliest Atmoran tribes to settle Tamriel. Their lineage can be found in almost all the human races of the world. After the elimination of the Aldmeri overseers and the first freedom of the Western Reach, the mark of the elf was left coursing through the veins of the indigenous Reachmen. The traits of the elves, their secretive, haughty demeanor and arrogance, are often apparent. But the same can be said of the Bretons. It was the other infiltrators who infected Reachman blood with the mongrel taint. Breton, Elf, Daedric, Imperial, Medic, Nord, and even Orcish blood pumps through the uncaring hearts and degenerate minds of these brutal clansmen of the Karth Canyons. In addition, we also have Hjalmarch, considered to be one of the most mysterious, and thanks to its vast marshes and abundance of ancient ruins, one of the most eerie holds in all of Skyrim. Morthal is the only major settlement in all of Hjalmarch. However, as we see when exploring the surrounding area in Skyrim, it's also home to Labyrinthian. As we learn in the book A Mirror Maze, Shalador and Labyrinthian, in the Merethic era, long before we discover the Nordic ruins, this location used to be known as the city of Bromjunar and was built by the dragon cult and dragon priests as a capital headquarters for meetings. This can be seen in Skyrim when we equip the wooden mask found in Labyrinthian. Upon doing so, we're transported into a different time where we see a sanctuary to the dragon priests. Here, we see the bust for each of the 8 masks we find, rewarding us with a unique bonus dragon priest mask known as Conoric. Before discussing Skyrim's current-day capital in the 4th era during the return of the Dragonborn, we also have Volkihar Hold, an area whose capital of Volkihar is known as the Hero's Graveyard by the residents of the region. Although Volkihar Hold is a part of Skyrim when we visit there, in the 2nd era, it was considered to be a part of West Cyrodiil, as we see in the book The Arcturian Heresy. In addition to its capital, Volkihar Hold is also notably home to Bleak Falls Barrow and the Twilight Sepulchre, which we'll talk more about later. This brings us to Hafengar, which is the home of Skyrim's modern-day capital of Solitude. A massive city built along a landmark known as the Great Arch, positioned just along the Karth River, Solitude is the headquarters of the Imperial Legion. Led by General Tullius, the Imperial Legion acts as an arm for the Empire of Tamriel as they seek to crush the Stormcloak Rebellion. We hear quite a bit about the Stormcloak Rebellion during the events of Skyrim and have a chance to not only see the events of this civil war unfold, but also control their outcome, depending on whether we want to support Ulfric and the Stormcloaks or General Tullius and the Imperials. The war was started by the Stormcloak Rebellion, as General Tullius says to Ulfric himself during the execution scene early in the game, where he says, quote, "Some here in Helgen call you a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the voice to murder his king and usurp his throne. You started this war, plunged Skyrim into chaos, and now the Empire is going to put you down and restore the peace." As we see here, although the Empire clearly isn't a fan of Ulfric, there are plenty who support him and the Stormcloak Rebellion, and although the rebellion sparked the civil war in Skyrim, some think the Stormcloaks are in the right. You see, before we wake up in the back of the prisoner transport carriage in the opening scene of Skyrim, there was a war that took place between the Empire of Tamriel and the Aldmeri Dominion, a united group of elven empires that spanned over 4 years until the Empire eventually signed a treaty known as the White Gold Concordat, which banned Talos worship across Tamriel. During this time, when the various holds of Skyrim were off fighting the Great War, the Reachmen reclaimed the hold, governing over themselves for 2 years until the signing of the White Gold Concordat, after which time a Jarl known as Jarl Hrolfdir, who was the father of Markarth's Jarl Ingmund, enlisted the help of Ulfric Stormcloak to reclaim his hold from the Reachmen. Ulfric and his men did so under the condition that Talos worship would be allowed in the area. However, after an infamous incident known as the Markarth Incident, which saw Ulfric and his men commit war crimes while retaking the Reach, he was then arrested. This sparked the sequence of events that led to Ulfric defeating High King Torygg using the Thu'um, as we hear about in Skyrim, and the birth of the Stormcloak Rebellion. In Skyrim, we're thrust into this political conflict and have the chance to either join Ulfric and the Stormcloaks in fighting against the Empire to restore Talos worship, or joining General Tullius and the Imperial Legion as they seek to stomp out the Stormcloak Rebellion and restore their version of peace to the land. One of the biggest aspects to this conflict is a give and take among the various races we meet throughout Skyrim. The Stormcloaks are primarily made up of the hardy Nords, with many holding an unfavorable view of elves and other races who support the Empire and the Imperial Legion. However, it's important to note that while the Stormcloaks are primarily made up of Nords, as we see in Skyrim, there are plenty of Nords who are supporters of the Empire and the Imperials. So Stormcloak largely equals Nord, but Nord doesn't automatically equal Stormcloak, if that makes sense. We then have the Aldmeri Dominion races, who the Empire lost to in the Great War. These are the High Elves, also known as the Altmer, who are known for their magic abilities and are closely associated with the Thalmor. The Wood Elves, aka the Bosmer, considered to be the more free-spirited elves when compared to the High Elves. And finally, the Khajiit, a race native to the region of Tamriel, known as Elsewhere, whose unique and complex view of life, authority, and mythology could very well be its own hour-long video. As we see in the Grey Quarter, we also have the Dunmer, also known as the Dark Elves, who are generally viewed unfavorably by other races, but most notably, the Nords of Windhelm. Long before the time of Skyrim, where we see the Dunmer with dark skin and crimson-red eyes, this race was known as Chimer, a race of elves with light skin who were cursed by the Daedric prince Azura. We also have the Bretons from High Rock, who are a race known for their magical abilities. With ancestors who are both human and elven, the Bretons have a unique perspective on the back and forth that largely takes place between the races of men and elves. As we read in the High Rock entry of the Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition. When the Nords first discovered the Bretons, they were left unsure of whether they were men or elves, mistakenly attacking them while under the impression that the Bretons were actually part of the Aldmeri Dominion. As the Nords concluded, the Bretons must have been the result of generations of Nords intermingling with the captured elves from the Nordic attack on Sarthal. As we see in Skyrim, there are also a number of other races that are less common throughout the land, such as the Argonians, a race native to an area in southeast Tamriel known as Black Marsh. In the 3rd edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire, a quote describes the Argonians, who have little to do with the civil war in Skyrim, as, quote, perhaps the most misunderstood, vilified, and reviled of all the sentient races. We also, of course, encounter two races of respected and feared warriors who are both unique in their own rights. The Red Guards of Hammerfell, who originate from the previously mentioned region of Nirn, known as Yokuda, which largely sank into the sea during the First Era under mysterious circumstances. Known for their hearty nature and battle prowess, Red Guards can be found adventuring and traveling all throughout Tamriel by both sea and land. And the Orcs, fearsome combatants known for their berserker rage, who, as we learn in Skyrim through the Discerning the Transmundane quest, have elf blood despite being unlike the traditional elves we've come to be familiar with. While the Orcs have several strongholds found throughout Skyrim closed off from the outside world, we also see that they've come to be accepted by the Empire despite their reputation as somewhat of outcasts. This brings us to the other major key element of Skyrim's main story. In addition to the great political conflict and civil war in Skyrim, we as the Dragonborn also exist in a time known as the Return of the Dragons. As we see during the execution scene early on in the game, Alduin the World Eater has returned to wreak havoc on a world already thrust into chaos by a civil war. Along with the return of Alduin, of course, we have the return of the Dragonborn as foretold in the Elder Scrolls. Throughout the 17 main quests in Skyrim, we learn that Alduin and the rest of the dragons we encounter throughout the game are coming back because a group of heroes sent him forward through time using an Elder Scroll in order to save the world, creating what is known as a time wound. As we hear from various Nord characters throughout the main quest, they believe that the return of Alduin and the other dragons signals the end of the world. And as we can see in the book Varieties of Faith in the Empire, the Nords believe that Alduin destroyed the previous world in order to make way for the new world. As we also learn from Shalidor's insights, Alduin also notably is credited with being the creator of dragon civilizations, and because of that, is considered to be the leader of dragons. This led to a bit of a power trip, with Alduin and the dragons then ruling over mortals, which gave way to the rise of the dragon cult discussed previously. Now, as you can probably guess from the number of dragon priests we fight throughout Skyrim, the dragon cult and dragon priests are no friend of ordinary mortals, and eventually the Atmorans began to grow increasingly resentful of the dragon cult. This led to a revolution and conflict between the two sides, until eventually the dragons themselves intervened. This intervention by the dragons marked the beginning of the Dragon War, where Alduin and Paarthurnax slaughtered mortals by the thousands. It's because of this that Paarthurnax, who once was Alduin's right hand during the Dragon War, began to feel sorry for mortals. According to the book The Dragon War, Paarthurnax changing sides was a massive momentum swing in the favor of mortals. Some believe that it was the Nord goddess Kain who intervened, while the Dragon War book explains that the priests of the Nine Divines believe it was Akatosh himself who stepped in. In either case, our old friend Party Snacks had a change of heart and decided to undo the damage that he, Alduin, and the rest of the dragons had done to the world. This led to Paarthurnax teaching mortals the way of the Thu'um, which completely flips the script and changes the course of history within Tamriel. As the last paragraph of the Dragon War explains, quote, "From these dragons, men learned magics to use against dragons. The tide began to turn, and dragons began to die too. The war was long and bloody. The dragon priests were overthrown, and dragons were slaughtered in large numbers. The surviving dragons scattered, choosing to live in remote places away from men. Despite that, however, the dragon cult wasn't entirely wiped out, and instead survived with the hope that one day dragons would return. Because of this, they created the burial mounds for the dragons who didn't survive the Dragon War. Although this was a major win for mortals, they still had yet to deal with their biggest threat, Alduin himself. 3 of the most respected Nord heroes, Feldir the Old, Harkon One-Eye, and Gormleth Golden Hilt, who we meet in Skyrim, took it upon themselves to rid the world of Alduin once and for all. But first, they visited another character we become familiar with during Skyrim's Dragonborn DLC, the first Dragonborn, Miraak. Miraak, as the first Dragonborn, was just brimming with confidence, and as we learn by speaking with him in the Dragonborn DLC, Miraak believed that he was powerful enough to defeat Alduin all on his own if he wanted to. Because of that, he wasn't interested in joining forces or helping the 3 great Nord heroes. Although we have a chance to fight alongside Feldir the Old, Harkon One-Eye, and Gormleth Golden Hilt in Skyrim, we really don't learn all that much about them, beyond the fact that in addition to leading the rebellion against Alduin, they also were the first 3 mortals to learn how to use the Thu'um. Of course, as we see in Skyrim, our 3 heroes were unable to defeat Alduin and instead were left with one choice: use an Elder Scroll to send Alduin forward in time in order to save themselves and essentially kick the rock further down the road, so to speak. This leads us right into the events of Skyrim, where we see Alduin wreak havoc on Helgen early on. After then warning Jarl Balgruuf of the dragon attack, finding the Dragonstone in Bleak Falls Barrow, helping Irileth and the Whiterun Guards in defeating Mimolnir, venturing up the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar, finding out the horn of Jurgen Windcaller was taken by Delphine, and meeting her in Riverwood, we then venture to Kynesgrove, where we see Alduin resurrecting another dragon by the name of Saklochnia. As Delphine points out, this makes it clear that dragons aren't just coming back. They're coming back to life thanks to the World Eater, Alduin. Not just that, allies of Alduin, such as the Dragon Priests, have also begun to resurface throughout Skyrim. After a brief stop at the Thalmor Embassy to investigate, our journey brings us to Riften, where we find Esbern, one of the last surviving members of the Blades, who we'll talk more about in a bit. Although Esbern has been hiding in the Ratway beneath Riften, there's more to this sewer hermit than meets the eye, and we learn that the return of Alduin isn't some random event, but rather something that has been foretold for quite some time. This begins our journey to learn a shout that will help us defeat Alduin. A journey that takes us to the throat of the world, where we use a time wound to learn the Dragonren shout before then traveling to Sovngarde to end Alduin once and for all. Of course, even with this resolution and the saving of the world, there's still one matter that the Blades want you to take care of: Paarthurnax. This optional quest sees Delphine turn a cold shoulder to the Dragonborn, indicating that unless you bring an end to Paarthurnax himself, then there isn't much for the two of you to discuss. Whether you choose to listen to the Blades and bring Paarthurnax to justice, or decide to spare him and allow him to return to the dragons to teach them how to live peacefully, will determine whether the Greybeards or the Blades decide to give you the cold shoulder going forward. This brings us to the next section of this video, where we'll explore the lore of the various groups and factions we encounter throughout Skyrim, starting with the Blades. The Blades are a group with origins dating back to the first era of Tamriel. As the book, The Rise and Fall of the Blades explains, when dragons began to appear in Tamriel, the Dragonguard traveled south, hunting them down in Skyrim. Here, they encountered fierce resistance in the form of the Nords under the rule of Reman I, the founder of the Reman dynasty and the founder of the Second Empire, who united Cyrodiil against the Akaviri invasion. Now, Reman I was one of the first documented Dragonborns in history, and according to the rise and fall of the Blades, when the Dragonguard heard him speak in the tongue of dragons, they had a change of heart and swore their lives to protect him. This lasted for decades, with the Dragonguard serving the descendants of Reman I all the way until Emperor Reman III's assassination towards the end of the First Era. It was at this time that the Dragonguard split up, and it wasn't until years later when Tiber Septim used the Numidium to conquer Tamriel and rise to power in the Third Era that the Blades were formed, expanding until they became an almost Secret Service-type agency that stretched across the land. As the rise and fall of the Blades explains, quote, "They reached their height late during the Third Era under the rule of the Septim Emperors. Despite their numbers, they kept their secrecy. The most visible and well-documented were the members who personally guarded the Emperor, still wearing the original Akaviri armor. But that was just the tip of the spear, for the Blades were a larger organization, stretching to every corner of Tamriel. These agents were of every race. They were merchants, thieves, craftsmen, mages, and warriors, all acting as spies, protecting the Empire as needed and operating in secret. They often acted alone, but some fragments speak of them meeting in secret fortresses across the continent, the most famous being Cyrodiil's Cloud Ruler Temple, where they hung the swords of those slain protecting the Dragonborn. Sworn to serve the Dragonborn, the Blades had a long period where they had a prominent place within the Empire. However, as we see in Skyrim, sometime between the Third and Fourth Era, the Blades had a bit of a fall from grace. So, what happened to the Blades? Well, when Tiber Septim fell in battle, it's believed he ascended into godhood and joined the 8 divines as the deity Talos, making him the 9th divine. This is important because if you remember from before, when the White Gold Concordat was signed, it outlawed the worship of Talos throughout Tamriel. Although this resulted in the disbanding of the Blades, it also put a pretty big target on the backs of the surviving members. Because of their loyalty to the Dragonborn, and during his life Tiber Septim, the Thalmor decided to take it upon themselves to wipe out the Blades that they encountered, forcing the group into obscurity. It wasn't until the return of the Dragonborn that the group once again re-emerged, playing a key role in the defeat of Alduin as we see in Skyrim. This brings us to the Greybeards, a group with a very different perspective when it comes to the Dragonborn. While Delphine and the Blades want the Dragonborn to not only save the world from Alduin, but also eliminate Paarthurnax, the Greybeards are essentially the ultimate pacifists, almost to a fault, and view the Blades as brash, headstrong barbarians. Should you comply with the final request of the Blades and eliminate Paarthurnax, you'll feel the wrath of the Greybeards, who will no longer help you study the voice and locate word walls. In addition, you'll also get a good scolding from Arngeir, who says, quote, "This is how you repay our trust. Paarthurnax's trust, his noble spirit, the wisdom of ages, his deep understanding of our existence, all gone. And for what? A mindless vendetta urged on you by a cabal of Akaviri barbarians. Begone, before even my philosophy is tested beyond the breaking point. We are men of peace, and you are not." But who exactly are the Greybeards, and how did they come to be so respected throughout Skyrim? To put things simply, the Greybeards are essentially monks, with High Hrothgar serving as their place of worship. There they practice a specific philosophy or lifestyle called the Way of the Voice that calls upon those who can summon the Thu'um to refrain from wielding it except in a time of, quote, "true need." This, of course, has been rather controversial because what is considered a time of true need varies from person to person. And as we see in Skyrim, despite the Civil War, the Greybeards have no desire to get involved. The Greybeards and the Way of the Voice philosophy both have roots that go all the way back to the First Era, making them one of the oldest groups still in existence within Tamriel. As the story goes, Jurgen Windcaller was a respected Nord warrior who grew to power partly because of his ability to use the voice. Despite this, when the Nords joined the Dwemer in the Battle of Red Mountain against the Chimer, they were defeated. While this defeat resulted in the disappearance of the Dwemer, it also had a profound impact on Jurgen Windcaller, who was in such disbelief that he lost the battle despite being able to wield the voice that he began an event called the 7-Year Meditation. During this time, which is recorded in the 10 etched tablets found around High Hrothgar, Jurgen Windcaller attempted to understand how he was defeated. He had the realization that the Nords, who had learned how to use the Thu'um as a way of protecting and defending themselves, had been misusing the gift of the voice. Because of that, rather than coming back with a vengeance and wreaking havoc on Skyrim, he took the opposite route, deciding to follow a life of silence and peace. This philosophy came to be known as the Way of the Voice. Fueled by the belief that the voice shouldn't be used as a weapon, Jurgen Windcaller, now known by a different name, Jurgen the Calm, then returned to the other Thu'um-wielding Nordic warriors to share his perspective. Although Jurgen had undergone a change of heart, the other Nord Thu'um wielders didn't share his point of view. For days he battled with 17 different Nord Thu'um wielders, swallowing their shouts until finally they were left with no other choice but to accept that Jurgen's Way of the Voice philosophy was too much for them. In turn, they followed him up the throat of the world, where the Nords believe Kine created them, and built a monastery where they could study the Way of the Voice in peace. There they've remained, studying the teachings of Jurgen at High Hrothgar. While we've already talked a bit about this next group when discussing Whiterun, next we're going to take a look at the Companions, a group whose influence in Skyrim runs deep and whose origins stretch all the way back to the Merethic era. As explained earlier in this video, the group's lineage comes directly from Ysgramor himself. But who was Ysgramor? What exactly did he need 500 companions for in the first place? And how did the Companions as we know them today come to be? If you're a longtime fan of the Elder Scrolls series, you're likely aware of the fact that the Companions don't appear in any of the previous games. For example, in Oblivion and Morrowind, we meet the Fighters Guild. However, in Skyrim, Bethesda decided to switch things up. Enter the Companions, a group who, as previously mentioned, settled in Skyrim after wiping out the Snow Elves. You see, when the Nords first immigrated to Skyrim after leaving Atmora in the Merethic era, they founded the city of Sarthol, which, as we learn from Tolfdir in the College of Winterhold questline, was the first major Nordic city in Skyrim and became the capital city of the early Nordic civilizations. When the Nords were settling Sarthol, they found something of great power. While no record of what the Nords found exists, it's believed that they discovered the Eye of Magnus, which we as the Dragonborn discover during the Sarthol excavation quest. This discovery eventually made its way to the Snow Elves, who decided to attack Sarthol in order to claim this power for themselves. This attack on the Nord city of Sarthol became known as the Night of Tears. Ysgramor, who the Nords call the Harbinger of Us All, and his two sons survived this attack and traveled back to Atmora, where they recruited 500 of the strongest warriors and returned to Skyrim, hunting down the Snow Elves as revenge. At this point, Ysgramor's men began to split up and settle in various parts of Skyrim, which led to the discovery of the Skyforge and the construction of Whiterun mentioned earlier. Now, the captain of this ship was a warrior named Jeek of the River, who after Ysgramor and his son Ilgar served as the third Harbinger of the Companions. After Jeek's passing, the fourth Harbinger, Mryfwheel the Withdrawn, sparked a pretty big shift in the Companions that made them start to resemble the Companions as we know them today. As the appropriately titled book, Great Harbingers of the Companions explains, Mryfwheel wanted the group to be more than just mercenaries for hire. Quote, "Our services could be purchased for the fighting of wars, but the commitment to individual honor meant that often shield brothers would be forced to face each other on the field of battle. The bonds of honor which bind the Companions threatened to break until Mryfwheel in his wisdom decreed that we would no longer be party to any war or political conflict of any kind. Because of his steady hand, the Companions today are known as impartial arbiters of honor, in addition to their glories on the field of battle." Now, as we know from Skyrim, one of the main aspects to the Companions' questline revolves around their controversial lycanthropic endeavors. This aspect of the Companions comes into play hundreds and hundreds of years after Ysgramor and Jeek served as harbingers of the group, when the Companions were going through a bit of a rough time. As the aforementioned Great Harbingers of the Companions explains, the group had a number of dishonorable harbingers in rapid succession that led to a Nord named Kyrnil Longnose deciding to take matters into his own hands. Quote, "It was Kyrnil Longnose who gathered the true hearts of the Companions in the wilds and stormed Jorrvaskr itself, killing the usurpers and returning honor through blood in the old ways. He began the tradition of trusted advisors called the Circle, after our great Lord Ysgramor's Council of Captains, who would serve as examples to the younger, newer Companions. This sort of renaissance for the Companions didn't last long, however, because the Circle began to practice lycanthropy, which set the group on a path that continues all the way through to the companion's questline in Skyrim, and the change of heart Kodlak Whitemane has towards the end of his life. Since so much of the Nord's story involves Sarthol, and we've already referenced its place in this next group's quests several times before, let's next dive into the origins of the College of Winterhold. Long before we, as the Dragonborn, become a student and ascend to the rank of Archmage, the college was led by the famous mage Shalidor. Although Shalidor was a real person and is believed to have been the founder of the College of Winterhold, there are quite a few stories surrounding Shalidor that seem to be exaggerated or outright made up in order to further his legend. One of those stories, as told in the book A Minor Maze, Shalidor and Labyrinthian, indicates that in the First Era he played a pretty key role in sparking a movement that called upon mages to be held to higher standards. This sort of shift in how mages conducted themselves is believed to have led to the foundation of the College of Winterhold, which, in addition to being a place for students to study the various schools of magic, is also considered to be home to one of the oldest libraries in all of Skyrim. As we see in Skyrim, much of the Nord population is suspicious of the college, and many of the Nord citizens of Skyrim have a negative view of magic as a whole. At the time we discover the College of Winterhold, the area immediately surrounding the college is largely in ruins, with locals such as Jarl Korea believing that the college is either to blame for the event known as the Great Collapse, or at least knew something considering the fact that the college is left mysteriously untouched. As the Jarl says, quote, "There's nothing left of Winterhold. Nothing. Everyone knows it's the college's fault that the sea swallowed our city. Still they deny it, but we all know the truth." As we can see from this piece of dialogue, among the locals in Winterhold, there seems to be a very clear line. Those who believe the college was at least partly responsible for the Great Collapse on some level, and everyone else. Long before we visit Winterhold, or as I should say, the ruins of Winterhold, the hold stretched all the way down to the surrounding sea, where it was eventually consumed by the Sea of Ghosts that surrounds the entire northern part of Winterhold. Despite this, we find very little evidence that the college is actually responsible for this event, and in the appropriately titled note on the Great Collapse, written to Jarl Valdemar, a previous Archmage, writes, "The storms that have racked the coast of Skyrim for close to a year have finally broken, but at great cost to us all. This great collapse that has devastated Winterhold was unexpected, I assure you. That the college has remained unaffected is only a testament to the protective magic placed around it so long ago. It in no way implies that we were somehow prepared specifically for this event, and is certainly no indication that the college was somehow responsible. Although the college may not have been responsible for the Great Collapse, we nearly find ourselves right in the middle of another cataclysmic event during the College of Winterhold questline, where we go on a journey that sees us uncover an incredibly powerful artifact known as the Eye of Magnus, which, according to the Psijic Order, is far too unstable to remain in the mortal plane. Although these Psijic monks play an integral role in the College of Winterhold questline and essentially come out of nowhere to claim the most important magical discovery in recent memory, we really don't learn all that much about them from the game. Without going too deep into the Psijic Order and the history of the Psijic monks, the group is one of the oldest groups in all of Tamriel, with a history shrouded in mystery. While we have a chance to study various schools of magic at the College of Winterhold, such as destruction or restoration, the Psijic Order are masters in the School of Mysticism, one of the least understood schools of magic, described as the study and manipulation of the very nature of magic. Throughout their history, the Psijic Order have notably helped to advise rulers of Tamriel and the Archmages of the College of Winterhold, However, much like the Greybeards and the Companions, they have remained independent when it comes to conflict, stepping in and directly involving themselves only when it's needed, as is the case when a certain Thalmor spy, Kof Ancano, attempts to take control of the Eye of Magnus. Shifting gears and going from the College of Winterhold to a group who actually deserves the suspicion that follows them, the Thieves Guild. While other groups such as the Companions are unique and exclusive to Skyrim, the Thieves Guild actually has several chapters throughout Tamriel. In past games, such as Morrowind and Oblivion, we see that the Thieves Guild is alive and well in other provinces beyond Skyrim. Each chapter of the Thieves Guild acts independently from one another, and at the time we encounter Brynjolf in the Riften Market, the Skyrim chapter of the Thieves Guild is in bad shape, and he won't hesitate to tell you all about it. Right from the jump, he'll tell you that his quote-unquote organization has been having quite a bit of bad luck recently, and although he doesn't seem to be too worried about it, other members of the guild such as Delvin Mallory believe that there's a curse plaguing the guild. The book Fall from Glory explains some of the theories surrounding the past glory and current struggles of the Thieves Guild, with the author writing, quote, "The Thieves Guild of Skyrim is something of an enigma. Within the last few decades, their order has gone from one of the largest, most influential criminal organizations to a small group of stragglers barely able to wreak havoc in their home city of Riften. Although evidence that could explain this rapid decline has never surfaced, speculation has run rampant." The author goes on to suggest two theories, one being that the guild is in fact under some sort of a curse, like Delvin Mallory says, while the other suggests that the group is feeling the effects of the previous guildmaster's death. We discover a fair bit about this previous guildmaster Gallus during the Thieves Guild questline in Skyrim, learning that he was one of the 3 nightingales tasked with protecting the skeleton key, which, in addition to being a really cool, unbreakable lockpick, also holds open the Ebonmere portal to the Twilight Sepulchre. Eventually, as we learn in Skyrim, Gallus becomes suspicious of Mercer Frey, the present-day leader of the Thieves Guild in Skyrim. However, before Gallus could prove that it was Mercer who stole the skeleton key and bring him to justice before the guild, he was assassinated. The book Fall from Glory theorizes that with the death of Gallus, many of the Thieves Guild's connections to the rich and powerful families throughout Skyrim perished. This is believed to have ushered in a period of instability and uncertainty for the guild, which caused their ongoing struggles. As it turns out, however, old Delvin Mallory is right, and because of the betrayal of Mercer Frey, who did in fact steal the skeleton key, the guild has fallen out of favor with the Daedric Prince Nocturnal. This twist takes us from a new member of the Thieves Guild looking to make a name for ourselves to a sworn agent of Nocturnal who vows to return the skeleton key to the Twilight Sepulchre. But what are the Nightingales, and what is their connection to the Thieves Guild? The Nightingales are a group of 3 agents sworn to serve the Daedric Prince Nocturnal by protecting her temple, known as the Twilight Sepulchre. Although there's no official documented connection between the Nightingales and the Thieves Guild, the group consists of 3 higher-ranking members of the Thieves Guild. As Gallus writes in the appropriately titled book, The Nightingales, the group's connection to Nocturnal is quite literally a business transaction titled The Oath. This oath allows the Nightingales to use one of 3 powers bestowed upon them by Nocturnal for their benefit and the benefit of the guild in exchange for protecting the Twilight Sepulchre in life and in death. After the death of a Nightingale, their soul is bound to guard the Twilight Sepulchre until the Daedric Prince herself decides that they have fulfilled their duties, at which point she calls them to her realm, known as the Evergloam, where they become one with the shadows. Despite the group and their oath to Nocturnal playing a major role in the events of the Thieves Guild questline in Skyrim, Nightingales have managed to keep an incredibly low profile throughout history, remaining unknown even to other members of the Thieves Guild. In fact, throughout the recorded history of Tamriel, the Nightingales have been viewed as an urban legend of sorts, with many unsure as to whether or not the group truly exists. As the book Nightingales, Fact or Fiction explains, only 3 pieces of evidence have been recorded that point to the existence of the group. One being the giant monolith outside Nightingale Hall, which is carved with the nightingale symbol of a bird with outstretched wings cradling a moon, also seen on a strange piece of armor that was found and then mysteriously disappeared when it was brought to the College of Winterhold to be studied. Fortunately for the Thieves Guild, the Nightingales are in fact real, and thanks to the Dragonborn, after returning the skeleton key, the curse on the group is lifted. Of course, when talking about all things shadowy and mysterious, we must look at the Dark Brotherhood, another shadowy organization that exists on the fringes of society in Skyrim. The Dark Brotherhood is made up of some of the best assassins throughout Tamriel. When we encounter the Brotherhood, we learn that the group has fallen under hard times, just like the Thieves Guild, and despite the organization's past influence, the Skyrim branch of the Dark Brotherhood is the last known chapter in existence. What sets the Dark Brotherhood questline apart from other guilds in Skyrim is the fact that players can decide whether they want to destroy the Dark Brotherhood or join them and ascend through the group's ranks. If we decide that a life of murder for hire is right for us, we embark on a journey that's filled with deceit, destruction, and of course, murder, all while becoming one of the most feared assassins in all of Skyrim. The group's origins date all the way back to the First Era, with many of the belief that they were once a part of the Morag Tong, a group of assassins in Morrowind who blur the lines between a guild and a cult, dedicated to the Daedric prince Mephala and the deity Sithis. Since the First Era, the Morag Tong have made their presence felt across Tamriel. In a book called The Brothers of Darkness, we learn that the Morag Tong actually went so far as to commit ritual murders in the name of Mephala, while also assassinating the likes of Emperor Riemann in the First Era and his successor, Potentate Versidue Shay, in the Second Era. Between those two massive contracts, the Morag Tong spread throughout Tamriel. However, this led to some overconfidence and quite a bit of sloppy work, with the words Morag Tong being written in Potentate Versidue Shay's blood after his assassination. This brazen attitude sparked a widespread change in the Morag Tong thanks to the nobles of Tamriel, who essentially came together in an effort to crush the group after realizing that if the Morag Tong were capable of eliminating high-level rulers, then none of them were safe. In the book Fire and Darkness, we learn that in the centuries after this happened, the Dark Brotherhood then emerged, with some of the mindset that a sort of, quote, religious schism was the source of the split between the two when the Morag Tong gave up their Mephala and Sithis worship for Vivek and Sithis. Despite the differences between the two groups and the fact that the Dark Brotherhood's true origins are shrouded in mystery, the Brotherhood and the Morag Tong both share a common ground in their reverence for Sithis. Although the Dark Brotherhood reveres Sithis, their connection to the deity comes directly from the Night Mother, who, as we can see in the book, the Night Mother's truth is the bride of Sithis and mother of his children. While we've heard about the Daedra and the Daedra, Sithis isn't Aedric or Daedric. Sithis is described as the void and the embodiment of the states of chaos and change. In the book The Monomyth, the author writes, quote, "In most cultures, Anuiel is honored for his part of the interplay that creates the world. But Sithis is held in highest esteem because he's the one that causes the reaction. Sithis is thus the original creator, an entity who intrinsically causes change without design." As we see in Skyrim, in the Dark Brotherhood hierarchy, the listener communes with the Night Mother and is considered a sort of intermediary between the two sides, relaying information to the speaker. Of course, at the same time, those who wish to summon the Dark Brotherhood also pray to the Night Mother while performing the Black Sacrament, which would certainly explain why worship of the Night Mother and Sithis isn't commonplace throughout Skyrim. So, with all that being said, whether you choose to join the Brotherhood and ascend the ranks or decide to destroy them upon first meeting Astrid, choose wisely. While Skyrim gave us plenty of fun factions to join in the vanilla game, we're introduced to two new factions we can join as part of the Dawnguard DLC, where we can join a group of vampire hunters led by a fierce Redguard warrior named Isran. As we learn in Skyrim, Isran was once a vigilant of Stendar, a member of the group who hunt Daedra worshippers. However, as we learn in Skyrim, he believed that the group was too soft and unprepared for a real threat, and decided to branch out on his own, reforming the Dawnguard while taking the fight to vampires across Skyrim. Of course, at the time we meet Isran and the Dawnguard, the group is attempting to gain a foothold in Skyrim and is in the process of rebuilding at the aptly named Fort Dawnguard, a massive castle with origins dating all the way back to the Second Era, when a previous Jarl of Riften had it built to hold his son, who contracted vampirism while out adventuring. Unable to bring himself to order the execution of his son, the Jarl had Fort Dawnguard built and ordered troops to guard the prison day and night to protect the rest of Skyrim from his son, the vampire. These soldiers who guarded the Jarl's son became known as the Dawnguard, and eventually they were left with no choice but to execute the Jarl's son. Although they only did so as a last resort, they were banned from the Rift and fell into obscurity. If you decide to join the Dawnguard, several of the members who you can recruit will tell you stories and rumors about the group that have been circulated around Skyrim. According to Soreen Gerard, for example, there were once rumors that when the group was disbanded in the Second Era, the members who guarded Fort Dawnguard had contracted vampirism and became the Hunters, wreaking havoc across the Rift until they were all hunted down and defeated. Another member of the Dawnguard we can recruit is the mage Florentius Banius, who claims to have the ability to commune directly with the god Arche. He tells an interesting story that he claims comes directly from the divine himself. According to Florentius, the Dawnguard didn't always have such noble ambitions, and rather than saving the citizens of Skyrim from vampires, acted as a group of bandits that would raid and pillage to their heart's content. However, it is important to note that while Florentius claims to have learned this information directly from Arche, there's little evidence found throughout Skyrim to support his claim. While we don't know whether or not this tale is true, what we do know is that hundreds and hundreds of years later, in the Fourth Era, Isran is attempting to rebuild the Dawnguard, and, so long as you aren't a vampire, you have the opportunity to join him. Our journey with the Dawnguard takes us on an adventure filled with plenty of twists that leads us to one of the last remaining snow elves and sees us enlist the help of a vampire as we seek to rebuild the Dawnguard and eliminate the group's rivals, the Volkihar clan. Which brings us to the final faction in Skyrim that we'll be discussing today, the Volkihar Vampires. At the intersection of greed and Daedra worship, we find Lord Harkon, a Nord who, according to the Prima official game guide, once ruled over a large portion of Skyrim. During his reign, Harkon had a reputation for being a pretty evil ruler who prioritized his own wealth over the well-being of his citizens. At the same time, no matter how much gold or how many material things Harkon acquired, there was one thing that plagued his thoughts: his own mortality. Fearing death, Harkon decided to strike a deal with one of the most cruel Daedric princes, Molag Bal, also known as the Harvester of Souls. Much to the dismay of his wife, Valerica, and his daughter Serana, in exchange for 1,000 mortals, Molag Bal granted Hakon and his family with the purest of vampire blood. This marked the beginning of the Volkihar Vampires. However, as we see in Skyrim, even immortality wasn't enough to satisfy Hakon. While he had the key to immortality and was poised to assemble a cult of vampires thanks to his pure blood, he was still plagued by the problems of ordinary vampires. Specifically, the sun burned his skin, much like the average vampire. However, Hakon wasn't content to just accept this as his fate, and instead began to do everything he could to take his power to a new level. He combed through archives and records in hopes of finding an answer, when one day he learned of a prophecy known as the Tyranny of the Sun. Hakon became absolutely obsessed with this prophecy, which claimed that a time would come when the sun would be no more and eternal darkness would cover all of Nirn. Hakon believed that he could make this prophecy come true and began doing everything he could to make it happen. His wife, Valerica, decided that he was not only becoming too dangerous for his own good, but was also coming dangerously close to fulfilling the prophecy, and decided that the only way to stop him was to seal an Elder Scroll away with their daughter Serana in Dim Hollow Crypt and take the other for herself before venturing into the Soul Cairn. During this time, Hakon was unable to complete the prophecy. However, in Skyrim, after discovering Serana, we have the choice to either join Hakon and the Volkihar Vampires in their quest to cover Nirn in eternal darkness, or put an end to his plans. This concludes today's video. Stay tuned for more Tamrielic lore as we anxiously await news regarding Elder Scrolls 6. And be sure to like and subscribe before heading out.